What brings happiness? Money, fame, or love? A report recently conducted by the China Household Financial Survey Research Center revealed what's really at the heart of happiness here in China. It turns out if you are married, in good health, and are making between 20 to 30 RMB per hour and work less than 8 hours a day, you might be among the happiest people in the world's most populated nation. Of course, maybe people are arguing about the numbers, whether they're correct or accurate or not, but this is certainly an interesting story to watch.
The pursuit of happiness. Chinese people make their wishes for the year ahead.
I hope everything goes well next year.
I wish for my parents good health and more progress for me next year.
But now, a new report claims to reveal the secrets to Chinese people's happiness in the past year. The National Happiness Report 2014 examines how factors including health, income, marital status, education, and occupation affected people's mental state.
Industrialization, urbanization has brought convenience to our society. It has also brought negative impacts on people's state of mind. 100 million people worldwide each year die from mental illness. It causes more injury than any war, plague, or famine. This is why we should pay more attention to the issue of happiness.
China's neighbor Bhutan is the pioneer of the whole idea of a happiness index. The country measured its wealth in happiness, not money. In 1972, the Bhutanese king even coined the term gross national happiness. GNH measures economic, social, and quality of life factors, combining all three into a happiness quotient. The index has caught the attention of policymakers around the world. In 2009, then French President Nicolas Sarkozy urged world leaders to look past economic factors as the sole measurement of prosperity. In China, President Xi Jinping echoed those sentiments in 2013, saying we can no longer simply use GDP growth rates to decide who the heroes are. Shanghai has now become the first major Chinese city to ditch its official economic growth target for 2015. It's a sign the Chinese government policy is shifting towards a focus on growth quality over quantity. More and more world leaders are talking about the importance of well-being as a guide to progress and prosperity. Committing to happiness doesn't mean giving up economic development. It means understanding the importance of a well-rounded life.
And for more on happiness index and what makes us happy and not happy, we are joined in the studio by Professor Fu Jun, who is the Executive Dean of the School of Government at Peking University. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, we have Professor Wan Danqing. She's a professor of sociology with the Hong Kong Baptist University. And in Holland, we have Mr. Ruud Winhoven, who is an emeritus professor of social conditions for human happiness at a university in Rotterdam. Thank you so much, professors, for joining us. First of all, may I go to you, Professor Fu? Whether the survey that we have mentioned in the background is 100% accurate or not, it could certainly use as a reference to judge what makes people happy and what not here in China. What do you think about the findings?
Well, Tianwei, first of all, I have to disclaim that I'm not an expert on that subject, but that subject, of course,
everybody wishes to be an expert about happiness.
It's extremely important. It's about the well-being of human beings. I'm here to toss some propositions or raise some questions. Well, to your question, I think an issue that we should be concerned is that there is the gap between your capacity or the reality around you and expectations that you have. If the gap is big, then people tend not to be happy. If the gap is small, then you have a better chance to feel happy. But you have to test that more rigorously with
And what do you think about the realities in China? Is that gap big or small, or actually so different according to different social groups?
Now, if you look at the recent polling results, if you look at the city of Beijing, I think it's tend to be correct. It's not the number one. It's not at the bottom. It's ranked about the 10th, right? in terms of environment, the cities tend to provide a lot of recreational activities, and that tend to make people happy. And the cities also would provide a level of competition. But of course, we need to be careful. There are, to me, two types of competition. One is what I call positive competition.
Right.
You want to be in the game, and that would generate a lot of excitement. Another is called a negative competition. You are forced to compete. You do not have the capacity, and that tend to give rise to a sense of unhappy.
All right, we see a lot of relative terms coming from you, Professor, but what about you, Professor Ryan, in Hong Kong? Of course, Beijing and Hong Kong are two very different metropolitans of China, but without talking about specific cities, what is your general judgment of the current happiness index, shall we say, of the Chinese population, a country that is experiencing dramatic changes every day?
Well, normally sociologists would predict that if a country is undergoing a lot of changes, people tend to be, many people will be kind of disoriented, confused, so they will be less happy. So it's not surprising if we have many unhappy people in China. But because there are more opportunities, then there are more uncertainties. So people may get a little bit confused, insecure, or uncertain, so they can be unhappy.
Right. But you know, one of the interesting
things
is
my understanding of it.
Right. But you know, one of the interesting thing of it is being happy the ultimate goal of our lives, whichever country we're talking about, or actually there are many other factors that are making our life fulfilling, which would also, on the other hand, feeding our happiness. On that, I would like to go to you, Professor Winghoven, because you have been conducting a survey over the years in China. Let's take a look at this. According to your analysis, which worked on a scale of 1 to 10, in the year 1990, China got around only 6.6. This figure rose to around 7.0 in the year 1995. And in the year 2001, that figure dropped back down to 6.6. And then the years that follows, it dropped even further to average 6.3. Of course, we could say those are just numbers. And it also has a lot to do with how many people you polled, who are they, what kind of living conditions they are in, what they were in at the moment. But sir, how do you see the numbers you've got?
Well, these numbers reflect what people think about their life. And I think that the first survey in the 1990 was somewhat inflated because many Chinese people were not yet accustomed to anonymous surveys, so they may have overstated their happiness. And I think that over the years they became more honest, and for that reason the averages dropped. And I also think that happiness is relatively low in China because so much is changing in Chinese society. Things are changing to the better, so in the long run the Chinese will get happier, but today they are still struggling with the change, and as a result their happiness lags behind their wealth.
Well, you know, when we talk about happiness, I always think this is a very abstract concept. There are so many contents that could be included in it. There can also be a small group of indicators that will lead to whether somebody is happy or not. So, Professor, if you've been doing this survey for quite some time, what are the barometers you are using to judge whether one person is happy or not? Usually, what are some of the indicators you would look at? Or you're just calling them out of cold and say, are you happy? And then you got a number.
Yes, actually that's what I do. So I define happiness as how much a person likes the life that person lives. And so you can ask that person, taking all together, how satisfied are you with your life as a whole? If you're very dissatisfied, you say 1. If you're very satisfied, you say 10. And that's a very simple question that most people understand. Very few say, I don't know. And if you want to know how happy people are in a country, well, take a random sample of, say, about 2,000 people, ask all these people to give a number for their happiness and take the average.
And therefore, Professor, may I follow up, Professor Winhoven, because we've been seeing debates, discussions about what is happiness and whether happiness is really bring us an enriched life over the past 15 years, shall I say. But this trend has died down because there are so many things that you cannot describe in real term. There are so many things that you cannot, in a way, describe by numbers either. So people are saying, is this really a science? Or this is only becoming a game that we can play? It is not necessarily that serious. It is not necessarily going to help us to understand what's going on and try to figure out what's really making us happy. Because we only got these numbers, what are the solutions?
Yeah, well, you can use these numbers to identify what makes people happy in a country. And for instance, if you compare average happiness across countries, and then you say, well, what is typical of the most happy and the least happy countries? Well, then you see that the most important factor is the quality of the government. Good civil servants, competent, not corrupt. In countries that have such kind of civil servants, there the citizens are happy.
Okay, Professor Ryan in Hong Kong, do you agree with that? Do you think there can be specific conditions once they are being met and then people are happy? Do you think it is still a science when we're talking about happiness? Or actually this is just a fad or trend that is already gone?
No, I think definitely this kind of happiness studies have its values. It helps us to understand people in a society or people in the world. So, well, you have to start with something. I hope there someday we have better measures and more scientific. But until now, I think as far as I'm concerned, I think these kind of studies are fine. But I think it will be problematic if you use happiness index as the only indicator of a society's progress or condition. That will be really problematic. It's just like using GDP as the only indicator of a country's condition.
Why is that? So people would say, well, making people happy and happiness is the goal of life. Is that what you're trying to say? This is not really the...
Well, I think if most, I think if it's a, I think a good society should have many happy people. If many people are unhappy, that's not a harmonious and good society. Don't you think so?
Well, I'm thinking so. But at the same time, is that you're saying it should not be the only indicator that's describing a country as a successful country or not. Back to you, Professor Fu. What do you think? The debates have been having for decades, if not hundreds and thousands of years of happiness. Are they really relevant? And meanwhile, uneven the numbers of national gross happiness index, which has been talked about for some time, and it seems that very few countries has really adopted that idea eventually. So is it really a useful debate that we're having?
Well, I think there are two dimensions to the subject, which is very important. It's about happiness. And if you read the Independence of the United States, and it begins with the pursuit of happiness, and we take that as self-evident. It's self-evident. So as a human being, to pursue happiness is important. The other dimension of that same subject is, now, if you take that subject seriously, how do we know that you are gaining in terms of the level of happiness? And that comes to measurements. Measurements are not...
How do you quantify it?
Measurements, if you say we get the ultimate truth of it, it's not. It's an endless process of getting there, getting there, getting there. Now, a way to think of that is without that. Do you know that better? So in that sense, it's very helpful to have measurements and to engage in random sampling. If the size is large enough, and it's very approximate to the truth.
So
but you should play the game consistently across time and space.
So should China adopt the so-called National Happiness Index to use that as an indicator of whether this country is heading to the right direction? Or this is really just one of those many things that people can look at?
If you do not consistently ask the same questions consistently over time and space, and you compare the figures, that can be problematic. If you use the same set of questions and ask those questions with a large enough size of sample data, and that is very helpful.
Right. Professor Windhoven, before we wrap up, I would really like to hear from you. We see your survey has come to an end for the year 2009. Since then, China has been changing a lot, the rest of the world as well. So is the debate about whether happiness index is still relevant or not. Where do you think this debate is going from now on?
Yeah, well, the debate is relevant because we know that we can be happy, and we know that average happiness is much higher in other countries than China. So there is some progress to make. And it's not only an issue for governments, but it's also an issue for individual people. And we live now in a modern multiple choice society where we can choose how to live and what profession to have, whom to marry. And if you want to make choices, well, then you'd like to know what will make you happier. And so also individual people are interested in happiness research.
Right. Well, sometimes too many choices also make people unhappy. Well, I guess that's an everlasting debate and discussion. But for now, we would really like to express appreciation for the three of you to at least bring us some happiness of discussion. Professor Fu Jun here in Beijing with us, and also Professor Ran Dan-Ching in Hong Kong, and Professor Rud Windhoven inside Holland. Thank you so much.